As a quick review, here is what we've covered so far. So here's what we did in session 1. Here's what we did in session 2. So if you see any topics, if you've missed a session, these are all posted on our Study Hall YouTube channel. So you can go back and watch anything you may have missed. This is what we did 2 weeks ago. So here's today. So today we're going to cover XYZ focus, how that works. We're talking about staging mode, a couple of additional edit mode things. That'll be real quick, just a few details we didn't hit last time, and then Scenic element channels. So these are all really great tools in the software. I think we're going to get in pretty deep today, so I want to get moving on this. And then in a couple of weeks, next time we come together, we'll be looking at augmented and magic sheets and how those can interact with each other. We'll be looking at fixture pose estimation and our focus wand tool in the app. So starting to get into the augmented reality portion of the software. And then a couple weeks after that, we'll be looking at all of your Vectorworks questions, and I know there've been a lot of those along the way. So we'll be looking at how augmented can work directly with Vectorworks through a couple of export options. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here, and we will get started. Alrighty, so I'm going to start from a new show file again today. So if you've been following along with the recordings, you more than likely you can continue to use your file, but you can also just start from scratch today. We are running beta build 351 today, so EOS version 3.0, beta 351. That is the most current version that's out there. If you are not in our beta forums yet, please feel free to join that, and you can download software. And as always, it is not our intent that you follow along live with us today. If you're watching live, we're happy to answer your questions in that Q&A box. Please use that. If you are watching this as a recording later on, then go for it. You can follow along. I think it'll be a little bit easier if you're able to pause us as we're going here. And any questions or comments, suggestions you have about 3.0 software, please post those on the beta forum. Please don't put those on the Facebook group, and please don't call our tech support about them. So the forums are where we want all of our beta traffic to go. That just lets us keep track of it all and stay organized so we can hopefully get the software released in the next couple of weeks. I know last time I said I was going to start. We had a couple issues with snapshots right at the end, and I said I would do that at the beginning. Because we have so much today, I'm going to renege on that promise a little bit. If we have time at the end today, we can hit snapshots again, but I do want to dive in to our main content today first thing, since we have a lot of good stuff to cover. Okay, so just a couple things to start. I'm going to open up my fashion show file that we've been using. So again, I'm just opening it. This is downloadable from the website. So I haven't prepped anything in this file. There we go. There's instructions in our very first video of where to find those show files. And then I need to make one change, and I do this every time, but since we're starting new, I need to go into patch and update the fixture library. So I'm going to go to fixtures and say update all. Okay, just a little housekeeping there. Okay, and then to set up my screens for today, we're going to do a little bit of split screen. And I want those to be over there. Don't need these. And if you are following along on the recording, having multiple monitors will be very helpful. But for today, I'm going to keep it all on one monitor so everybody can see everything that we're doing here. All right, so I'm getting my augmented tab opened up here. And I'm just going to resize this a little bit. Here we go. Okay, so we are up and running. Again, this is a fashion show file that is downloadable from our augmented page. Okay, so I'm going to go to bookmark 3. Alrighty, so the first thing we're going to take a look at today are XYZ focus palettes. So these are a new style of focus palette. It's not a new type of target. It's still under focus palette, but it's a new way that we are able to store and recall information from focus palettes. Okay, so I'm going to grab channels 21 and 28 and turn those on, and those are my 2 movers on the end here. And I'm going to focus these one at a time over just in the corners of the end stage here. And I'm just using click to focus. I'm not going to be too precise. It will become apparent why we're doing this in just a moment. And we're going to record that as Focus Palette 101. Make sure I get both of them here. Okay, and you can see in our live display, let me toggle off one more thing so we can see better. And toggle off some of these intensity parameters that we don't really care too much about today. Okay, so we can see our pan and tilt have Focus Palette 101. We'll talk about our X, Y, and Z focus columns there in just a moment. So the other thing I'll point out here is our pan and tilt, and I'm using ML controls today since I'm on Nomad. Your encoders will obviously work the same way. So if I pan and tilt, they're going to work the way they always have. You'll notice our X, Y, and Z are also changing, even though they're gray. But right now I'm only controlling tilt. Here I'm only controlling pan. But you'll see the X, Y, and Z are synced up with those. I can control these using those X, Y, Z parameters as well. If you're on a console with encoders, if you hit the focus encoder selector button again to get to the second page, just like you do with other encoder properties. So X, Y, and Z are on the second page there. That's how you find those. So what these let us do is, I'll move Y first here. So I'm moving this along the Y axis of the model. So these are going in a straight line down my stage here. Now, you'll see that pan and tilt are changing because that's what's required to make these go in a straight line based on where they are here. I can do the same thing with X. So they're moving directly along the X axis of the model, and pan and tilt are adjusting as needed. I'm going to click to focus on our person here, and then I'll show our Z as well. So if you kind of look at where the beams are crossing, that is going straight up and down, but our X and Y aren't moving at all. I'm only affecting the Z focus parameter. So a new way to control fixtures. Easier to do compound moves if you need to move a fixture or a group of fixtures just in a straight line along your stage. I am also going to turn on realistic so we can see those shadows. That will help us out a little bit too. There we go. Oh, and we can also enter a value on the command line just like any other parameter. So if I get Z focus on my command line, I can type in 6.5, and that will put it at 6 foot 5 inches on the Z. So that works just like any other parameter as you would expect. Okay, so I can also store this using the XYZ data. So what I mean by that is in my encoder display, if I open that up, If I go to focus, so here's my pan tilt page. If I click focus again, here's my XYZ. You'll see that on both pages I have an XYZ format enable button. And when I click that, my data is going to move, or my manual data, the red numbers, move from pan tilt over to XYZ. See that, see a little more. So I click it again, it's going to move back to pan and tilt. So the lights aren't moving, it's just changing which values are manual and therefore will be stored. So I'm going to leave it on the XYZ for now. I'll collapse that back down. And I'm going to record these as focus palette 102. Okay, so if we go into blind and look at focus palette 101, you can see that our pan and tilt are white, indicating that that's the data that was stored. That's what it's looking at. If I go to 102, I'm going to hit next. You can see that now the XYZ are white. So at a glance, I can easily see which data set is being stored in that palette. So the opposite one, so in this one, the pan and tilt data is still there. I can still see what those values are. We'll go back to the first one. Same with XYZ. I can see where that is, but those are being calculated from the pan tilt based on where that light is hung in space. We'll look at how we can use this to our advantage next. Okay. So if I go into patch here, I know I've got a bunch of tiny windows here. I'm going to take those same fixtures. So I'm going to take 21 and 28, and I'm going to adjust their physical position. So let's say I'm touring, and the next night they're in a different place. They're not exactly the same height off the deck or up from plaster line, center line as they were before. So I'm going to take my position, and I'm going to add 12 feet to that, just to give it kind of an extreme example here. I'm going to add 12 feet, and you can see in the model they have raised 12 feet. So they're out of view here. Now when I go back to live, it recalculates, and now they are still pointed at our target. And that is because the lights are still, if we look at our data here, they're still focused at 0x, 2'5", y, and 6'5", z. Those values haven't changed. The pan tilt values have changed because it was recalculated based on where those lights were hung in patch. So if I take these lights and I put them in our first focus palette, which remember we stored that as a standard one with pan and tilt. Oops. Oops, if I hit the right button here. Focus palette 101. There we go. So now those have raised up about 12 feet because we didn't store those as XYZ palettes. So the positions of those fixtures have changed. The pan and tilt values haven't. They're exactly what they were previously, but the XYZ have changed. So if we go back to our other one, learning how to work my keyboard this morning. Thank you for your patience. There we go. Those are there. We can change these after. We can also change these after we store them. So if I go back into blind and look at, there's actually a couple focus palettes already in this file, so I'm going to select all of them. So 1 through 102, and I want to look at spreadsheet here, and then I'm going to just select 21 and 28, which are my channels, and go to Flexi Selected, so we can see a little better here. So here you can see, and I know you can't see, well here, let's collapse this down a little bit. There we go. So only 102 is actually stored using the XYZ values. But we can change this after we've stored it too. So let's say we want 101 to change. So all I have to do there is select it, open up my encoder display, and I would need to choose my channels. And hit the XYZ format enable button here, and that will toggle that over. And now those values are sort of locked in to that's what the palette, that's what's important to that palette. So a couple notes about this. Here, let's go back to live. Collapse that down. So a couple notes about this. If you're doing a theater show where you're going to rehearse it, tech it, run it for 6 weeks, and then never use it again, there may not be much value or really difference in using pan tilt or XYZ. If the lights aren't going to move once they're hung, the cues are going to be the same, played back the same. It's probably not going to make any difference to you. Where this will make a difference is certainly for touring, where your lights are moving around, but your stage is the same dimensions. That actor is always going to be 3 feet down of center, 2 feet stage left, but the light is going to move. Then that's where this becomes really, really powerful. There are some examples of when you, even in a touring scenario, where you still may want to use pan and tilt. So I wanted to look at that next. So let's go ahead and sneak all of this out of here. And I'm going to go to my home camera bookmark here and just back up a little bit. So we're looking directly at our performer there. And I'm going to grab 3 movers on each end, or on the far end. And turn those on. And with these, I want to, I'm just going to tilt them up. And we're making it kind of an aerial effect here. Maybe we've got some good haze. And then I'm going to say I need, I'm going to fan those. So pan, fan, center, enter. And then I can kind of pan those, make a nice little crosshatch in the sky there. And maybe tilt them down a little. Okay, that looks nice. And then I'm going to grab my next 2 fixtures and put those on our person. And zoom those out a little bit. And now I'm going to click to focus and set a focus, a height offset. Bring this a little downstage. There we go. Whoops. So this is, so here's our look. So we've got the nice crosshatch in the air, and then we have 2 fixtures focused on our person here. So in this example, I'm going to take these 2 fixtures on our person, on our talent, and I want those to be in XYZ format, because I always want those to be, I'm sure you can see that in the live table. I always want those to be focused there. The ones in the air, I'm going to keep as pan tilt, so that they're almost flat. They're a little up from flat. I like the relationship to each other. So even if my fixtures move, I want to maintain that crosshatch in the air. I don't care what those lights are hitting. They're hitting, out in the audience or just up in the air somewhere. That's not important to me, unlike when I'm hitting the person on stage. So let's go ahead and record all of this as focus palette 103. And then if I go into blind and look at that focus palette, just to go to Flexi Active here, So you can see that that is stored in that way. So my two fixtures, 24 and 31, are stored as XYZ, and the rest of them are stored in pan tilt. Okay, so now if we go into patch, and I'm going to select the ones on this side first. So those are going to all move 5 feet out. So I'm going to do an offset, I'm going to say plus minus 5 feet, and that's on the x-axis. I'm going to put some slashes. I don't have to. We've looked at all this in previous sessions. So I'm going to move those back 5 feet. I'm going to select 4 on this side, and those are going to do the same thing. This time it'll be a plus 5 for those. And then all of them, so all 8 fixtures, are going to move up 2 feet. I'm sorry, down 2 feet. So plus minus 2, slash slash, plus minus 2. So it's on the Z axis. There we go. And now if I hit live, camera little, you'll see that even though those fixtures are further out and lower than they were when we recorded it, the ones in the air still have a nice aerial crosshatch pattern, and the ones on the person are still focused in that correct spot. So there are definitely still uses for pan tilt in a situation where your fixtures are moving. I think most of the time XYZ, when you're hitting something on stage, is going to be what you're looking for. But we have both options now. And again, you can always go in and swap this after the fact. If you forgot to switch it over manually when you recorded it, you can always fix that after. So I'm going to just put all these lights back for the rest of today. But in the meantime, Jason and Nick, what questions do we have?
Yeah, so we got a number of questions in here about how XYZ is going to move across the stage. Like if you use XYZ, is it going to follow a straight line across the stage?
Here, let's move. Let me get rid of that so we help. So if we move, I'm sorry, Jason, can you say that one more time?
Yes, we got 3 or 4 questions, all phrased a little bit differently, but basically asking if you start from an XYZ position on stage and end at an XYZ position on stage, will it be smart enough to follow a straight line from point A to point B?
Sorry, I'm having view issues here. There we go. If we start, so it's the XYZ are always going to move in the model space. So if I take these 2 fixtures here and I move them, forgot to make my snapshot. So if I move them on the X axis here,
This is basically a question about queuing. So in Q1, they're in one place. Q2, they're in another place.
Oh, how are they going to get from A to B?
Yeah.
Got it. No, so they're going to go in the most direct way possible, as they always have. If we are, if you record it just as a along the Y. So here, let's look at this.
Yeah, I'll just while you're putting that up, Rob, and Yuli confirmed as well. Because we're fading from an XYZ location to another XYZ location, it is going to take a straight path, right? So just like when we fade any parameter from point A to point B, if you're going from Y of 30 feet to Y of 15 feet, it will track that straight line. So I haven't done extensive stuff to see what it does with multiple heights and things like that, but I think it's going to try and travel that as a straight line between those 2 points.
So I just recorded a Q1 and a Q2 here. So there's Q1, and I'm gonna hit go. And I did use this. So we are on the XYZ. Those had focus when I stored it. So let's look at, if I back up a queue, if I take those channels and if I switch it over to pan and tilt and update my queue, and then if I go to my next queue and update that one as well. Yeah, so now it is paying attention to the pan tilt. So I think it took me a minute dealing with displays to get to your answer. Thank you for your patience. So it is going to pay attention to how that data is stored here. And so this is just in the queue. We're not in a palette here. I just stored the absolute data in the queue. But again, just to show what we see here, I'm going to go back to Q1. So notice that pan and tilt have the blue values, those, and the XYZ are gray. So when I hit go, because our tilt's not changing much, like only our pan is. But if we switch those to XYZ and update, so again, the position on stage hasn't changed at all. And now they are going in a straight line. And the pan and tilt are adjusting appropriately.
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of things for clarification. The first is that, as Rob showed, as is the case with a lot of things that we do regarding fades and stuff, we're always calculating this on the queue that we're going into, right? So you'll notice as Rob was updating the example, he had changed the first queue to be stored in pan tilt space, and the second queue was still in XYZ space, and it followed the XYZ model. We do that with discrete timing. We do that with color stuff like fade paths or color paths, right? So it's always about the destination queue. It's all about how it's stored where we're going. To that end, just a little bit of clarification. You know, pan and tilt and XYZ are sort of inextricably tied together, right? So wherever the fixture is currently located, and wherever you're trying to point it at in space, is going to, you know, produce those values, right? So for those of you that have been around for a really long time, when we used to do hue saturation and native color, right, as two separate color spaces, those two were always inextricably tied. If you changed one, the other got modified. So this really has to do just with which space you're storing the information in, right? So you can't have pan tilt information that is completely separate and uninformed by the XYZ information. So keep that in mind. This is just about which side we store, and that also means how we play it back, where discrete timing goes. All of that stuff gets hung on one of those two spaces. So this is pretty useful. The other thing is, keep in mind that for this stuff to be useful, Augmented has to be open somewhere. That XYZ space button doesn't show up unless Augmented has been initiated. So keep that in mind. And I don't remember, I'd have to check, I don't remember if we show the XYZ if Augmented hasn't been started. But keep that in mind.
All right. A couple questions here that will be better to answer a little bit later, so just give me a second to cycle through some of them. Is there an easier way to get to the XYZ enable button, or is there intention of making it easier at some point, like with a soft key?
I asked this question actually on the forum yesterday. Currently that is the only place the button lives. there's several suggestions about other places it could live. When I was prepping for this class, I was like, oh, it'd be really handy if it was in ML controls. So that was the suggestion I made. So right now, that is the only place. If you're on a console with encoders, it'll be in the encoder display. If you're on a TI, it'll be actually in that screen. But right now, that is the only place that button is located.
Okay. This question kind of leads a good direction. Do copy to and recall from work for XYZ info? So essentially only needing to focus one mover to a point, record the palette, and then copy that palette to all the other movers.
Yes, great question. So yes, it does. Let's take a look at it. Zoom this out a little. So if I point, my one mover here, and I'm going to make sure and set my Z height. So we're on the person. I can say that channel XYZ copy to a bunch of my movers, and those are going to go to that same XYZ, which you can see in live and in the augmented display. So yes, absolutely.
But that also brings up the point of by type palettes as well. I don't know if you had specifically said that in this section or not.
Oh no, we did not look at that. Let's look at that in our palette list here. Let's go to a full screen so we can see. So we could say, I'll do 101 and 102 for the moment. We'll make those by type. We'll clean them up. And then if we look at those in blind, yeah, so these were stored slightly differently, but we could obviously do an add enter, and those are going to function just like a by type palette would normally. So our focus palette 103, which had some in each. Obviously, that's going to be discrete data, since we can only have one leader channel. So if you do have a combination like this, then that wouldn't work for you necessarily. But these are discrete anyway. So the short answer is yes. You can use by type. It'll work just like it has for a long time.
Excellent.
Really quickly. I'm sorry, Jason. Just before we move on, so XYZ enable is not a soft key in the macro editor, but you can learn it. So that might be a workaround if you want to post that on a screen or a button. So.
Excellent. What about swapping fixture types? Will we be able to, will all the palettes and everything stay if you swap a fixture type?
Yeah, so as long as the new fixture has pan and tilt, then yes, that data is going to come across. Now there could be, if you're moving from a fixture that's a foot tall to a fixture that is 6 feet tall, that could, are offsets of where the base point of the fixture will come into play and things like that. But if you are able to get the gate of the fixture, which is where we initialize the beam of light in the model, to be in the same place, then they should be very close to each other. And then obviously other factors are going to come into your zoom. Beam parameters are going to have some effect on this if your iris is closed, or that's a silly one. But the positional data will come across exactly.
Okay. And then presumably you could apply a curve to a Q part to modify these paths as well, correct? Just like you can everywhere else?
Yes. So I have not actually played with that, but I would expect
I think
that
you
to
should
be
be
the
able
case.
to. Yeah, while you're setting that up, Rob, I think that's actually a really interesting idea. In the same way that if we're trying to follow a straight path that maybe an actor is going to walk, when we fade, we're going to fade the same rate across the path that we're taking. So adding a curve may be a really interesting way to do like a soft start or a soft stop for that, right? So it picks up a little bit more slowly, tracks, and then kind of slows down. So if you're trying to mimic the path that an actor may be walking to follow them with a pool of light, curves, some discrete timing might give you a leg up to do that kind of stuff.
Okay, while Rob is still fixing this up, Nick, maybe you can chime in on this. Question that came up in a couple sessions ago was about how to keep the lights on the stage when you're using XYZ. I know a lot of times when we're dealing with pan and tilt, we can hit end stops and things, and the lights do weird things. We have to use the flip tool. We don't really have the flip tool here when we're using XYZs. Is this a way to kind of combat that a little bit to make sure the lights are staying in the play area as much as possible?
Yeah, I certainly think experimenting with XYZ, again, because we're dealing with real space data, right? We are going from a fixed point in space to another fixed point in space, what we fade. We will do better than we had previously done, I think, with just pan and tilt value. I think you're still going to run into limits, right? There's still going to be a point at which the fixture can't make the path that it needs to, and it might jut out a little bit. There may be a point where just the way that the fixture was oriented, it may have to swing around in order to do what it's doing. It's going to do the best that it can with the limits of the fixture and the current orientation of the fixture. So I'm not saying that you won't still have to do some cleanup, because you likely will, but I think this is why this is great that Rob is using this set in particular for these examples. Sort of a long staging area is a really good way to demo this kind of stuff, and hopefully, as long as you haven't wound up your fixture too much, you should be good to go.
Yeah, I think we talked about this last time as well, where it's really important, even though we have all these new tools, the basics are still applying. If we start from an own position every single time, so we don't get ourselves in a position where you have to flip all the time. So like, you're still going to want to start from a known palette or home position that's kind of pointed on stage, that sort of stuff, to kind of keep yourself out of trouble. All of those same rules still apply.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, having if you're going to be heavily using XYZ, having a home preset that has XYZ stuff stored in it is really, really useful, because then you can home that stuff to a particular location. The other thing that I think will become useful, don't forget that your home preset can be set to a different target via a macro. So if you have, your fixtures in a particular wash or on a downstage edge for a certain scene that you're building, and then you need those fixtures to a known location out in the house or up on a scenic balcony or something, it's really easy for you to use a macro to just change that home preset so that you can work in concentrated locations of your space with a bit more ease. And I think XYZ, again, you're spot on, Jason, like, it doesn't fundamentally change what we're doing, but it gives us another avenue to get to it. So yeah.
Here's a question that I have. If you do use the flip tool when you're working in XYZ space, does it pull the and tilt information? Like if you're in a sequence where you're queuing things up and you flip it in the middle.
I honestly haven't played with that. Why don't y'all move on and I can poke at that. I think I know how I think it should work, and why don't I do some stuff and get back to you in a few minutes?
So that one, I'll say on the curve thing, I played with it some. I did not have success, but it could also be operator error. So I think to table that, but that's a cool idea, and it should work, of course. So I will put that on my list to play with. The flip question is much easier to check. So the XYZ does stay the same, so you can see the pan tilt.
Great.
Is changing, but the XYZ is not.
Yeah. So again, if you're not familiar with flip, even with just pan and tilt information, you know, every moving head fixture can get to the same location in its range 2 ways, with 2 different combinations of pan and tilt. And so flip just gives you that other option. We've known about that math since kind of the dawn of EOS. So that's going to do the exact same thing here. So your pan and tilt values will change, but I guess the point is that, you know, Rob proved that it doesn't change your space that you're working in.
Okay.
Good stuff.
We have a couple of questions here. I think it will be much more pertinent later on in the conversation, so we'll kind of hold off on them and hit them when we hit the better points.
Great. Thanks, Jason. So the only other thing, if you're following along on the recording that I did kind of while we were talking, is I put all of our fixtures back to their original locations. I just made, I hit undo on those, making most of them go further and lower, and then the 2 that we moved way up high at the beginning, I just made their Z match the other ones. So everything is back on the truss where they should be. Okay, so next I want to talk about staging mode. So this is a new mode that we'll kind of get into. It's kind of like, so we have live and blind, and it's kind of a third way to think of those spaces. So the first thing I'll point out is this is a new keycap. So I've got my virtual keyboard open here. So staging, and I believe the actual keycap just says stage, because we can't fit staging mode on a little key. So it is replacing the scroll lock key. So it'll be right next to blind. We do have a program in place. It will launch, fingers crossed, at the same time the software is released, in order for you to get that new keycap shipped out to you. The way that will work is you'll go on, we'll have a website dedicated to it. It'll be part of the EOS page somewhere on our website. Basically, you'll go in, you'll put in your serial number, and it will tell you you have this console. So if you have an Ion Classic, if you have an Element 2, if you have a TI, whatever you have, to determine the right style of key. There are a couple consoles where you'll have to help us out and tell us which keycap style you have. I like to call them the squishy or the clicky, which is the older and the new style. But the website kind of helps you figure that part out if you're not sure. And then we will ship you for free a keycap and a keycap puller to allow you to, and directions on how to swap those out. That is how it works for folks in the U.S. And the reason that part's U.S. only is on the back end. It's through our swag store, which only works in the U.S. If you are not in the U.S., then that website will direct you to contact your local ETC office, and they will be able to help you out. So we will be sending out free keycaps when the software is released, so you can have the cool staging button there. Scroll lock will still be there. It will simply be shift and stage. So we're just adding a shift and then the same button to get the scroll lock functionality that's there. Okay, and then as we go through here today, I'm going to try and be cognizant about talking about what the light on that button is doing, whether it's off, on, or blinking. Those are important distinctions. In Nomad, and I learned this yesterday practicing for this class, there's currently not an indicator of that. So if Lowell gets on here, or I'll mention Anne, I think we should add that. So you'll just have to take my word for it, but if you're on a console, this is what the light will be doing today. Okay, if there's any questions about keycap replacements, we can save those for the end of staging mode as well. But I'll be using the keyboard shortcut today, which is F6. But I just did want to point out where that will be on the face panels. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to queue out here. And in order to show this off, I need to write a couple of queues real quick. We're just going to write 3 queues so we have some content to work with. So I'm going to query all of my color source pars and turn those on, and I want them to be blue. Great. And then there's a source 4 that hits this person. There it is. I'll turn that on. It's channel 6. So this will be our first queue. So we'll say record queue. I'm going to make it be 201. So if you're using an older show file, this hopefully you shouldn't step on anything that's already there. If you're using the same show file throughout this whole series. So there's queue 201. I'm going to take channel 6 out, and I'm going to grab those pars again and put those at 50% and make them amber. That's going to be queue 202. And then for our last queue, I'm going to grab these 4 movers. So not the 2 at center, but the 4 past that, so 23, 25, 30, and 32. And I'm going to turn those on. We're going to click to focus on our person there. Our height offset is still where I want it to be. And I'll zoom those out a little bit. I'm going to put Gobo in there. And we're going to sharpen that up. And let's go ahead and put green on our color wheel in there. Okay, and this will be queue 203. So now we've got a couple of queues to work with here. So we may have looked at this way back at first, like in our intro. I'm not sure. So in Augmented, if I go into blind, actually I'm going to go to queue 201 first. So we're sitting in our first queue. But if I jump into blind, and I hit next, it's going to show me in our live display what's going on, like it has since the dawn of time. Next. But our augmented window is going to also visually show us what's happening. So on our real live stage or venue that's being output to, nothing is changing, just like always, when we're in blind. I'll also try to clarify, since I don't have a way to visually show you all an output from stage. I'll try to make sure to talk about that. So we can see what's happening in blind here. So staging kind of came about by the need to be able to make changes in blind without automatically storing it. Now that I can click to focus and do all these visual things in blind, but forever everything in blind has been stored immediately, and that may not be what I want to do now that I can visually do more with the software. So that was kind of the genesis of the staging mode. So just to quickly show that, if I grab this mover here, so I'm in blind, I'm in our first queue. If I point it over here and turn it on, that's helpful. If I zoom it out a bit, and let's tip it down a little so you can see it. There we go. And if I put cyan in it, so now if I hit next, clear my command line, hit next, next. So that light is now in all my queues. It's tracking through, which is following the rules of blind and tracking. So maybe I didn't want that. Maybe I just wanted to see what it would look like in that queue without actually forcing it to save. So staging is a way to kind of audition looks and then deciding to commit them or to toss them out. Okay, so I'm still in blind. I'm back in 201. So I'm going to enable staging mode. So I'm going to hit that stage key, F6 on Nomad. And you'll see on our command line, it now tells us our queue. Tells us if we're in blind, tells us our queue, and now it also says staging mode. And The keycap would be solid. It's a red LED back there, so it would be solid red at this point, indicating that we are in staging mode. So what I can do now is I'm going to grab that same fixture here. I'm going to get rid of the color. Just on the color. Let's put a gobo in there. Let's sharpen that up. And I want my gobo to rotate a little bit. Sure. And then maybe I need to, okay, yeah, so that's fine. So what I want to show here is that our values in our table display here, or in our blind tab, are orange. So that is indicating that those values are stored in what we call the staging buffer. They are not in the queue. They're also not live on stage. I just want to point that out here because we are in, we're in staging mode. We're not in live. So those values are orange. So let's say I don't like this look and I just want to get rid of it. I can clear the staging buffer by hitting stage either twice or stage enter. So I'm going to hit F6, F6 again, and all of those changes are wiped out. So the orange values are gone from my table display, and in my augmented window, I'm back to where I was before. Okay, so I'm going to go back into staging mode. So I've hit stage again, and I'm going to pick that same light. I'm going to make some of those changes again. So I'm going to say, get rid of my color. Let's put that gobo back in here. And I'm going to have it rotate again. Sharpen that up. And maybe I need to shutter it off that back wall there. So we'll come to shutter, and we'll push that shutter in a little bit. There we go. Maybe some angle. Okay, great. So now let's grab this mover and, whoops, wrong one. Or I had both of them. Forgot to do the double click. That one back there. We will select only that mover. And that's going to be on the opposite side. Turn that on. We'll zoom it out. So we can put it where we can see it on our screen here. Okay, so I can, if I do want to commit some of this into blind or queue only, I have some options. So I can take it. I can take everything, sort of a like a record from a clear command line kind of function, or I can be more selective. So let's say in this example, the second light, 31, which is currently selected. Let's say, you know what, I don't want that one, but I do want the rotating gobo fixture. So I can say 31 sneak, enter, and the orange values are going to go away. So that light has been removed from the staging buffer. So we're using sneak and blind, exciting stuff. So let's say I do now want to commit the rest of it, which again, it's just one channel, but I'm going to clear my command line. So if there was multiple channels, it would all take. And the syntax for that is copy to enter. I'm not going to press enter yet. So copy to enter will move values from the staging buffer into your current location. So right now it's blind Q201. So I'm going to go ahead and say Q only this time. So I'm moving from the staging buffer into this queue, Q only. So now if I press next, those values did not track as we would expect. If I hit last, they're right there. And I do want to clear my clear staging mode now. I'm going to do that. And now my stage button is dark. It's not lit up anymore. Okay, so if I go into live here, you'll see, so we're still in 201, and this is what our actual stage has looked like this whole time. Nothing has changed. The reason that light isn't there is I have to refresh the state of the queue, which has always been the case when I make a change in blind to the queue I'm sitting in on stage. So to refresh that, I can say go to queue enter, and that's going to bring that light up where it was in blind. So nothing new, no changes on that functionality. Okay, so let's take a look at how staging mode works in live. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and press stage again. So just like in blind, everything here, the values are going to become orange. Nothing is going to be output on stage. We're using the augmented model as a way to try things out, to audition lighting options. So again, the keycap is solid red now. So now I'm going to grab my pars, and I'm going to put them at 50%. I'm going to change them to red. Again, in your live display, those values are now that orange color. So even though we're in live, nothing has changed on our actual stage. Make sure we're clear on that. So back to what I was saying about this kind of 3 states that we can be in. So if I go into blind right now, so I haven't done anything with this information. It's still sitting in the staging buffer. I haven't cleared it, and I haven't committed it anywhere. So if I go into blind, and I'm going to hit next just to show a different queue. So right now, the stage button is blinking. So it's indicating that there is information there, but we're not currently seeing it in the model. So I can be in blind, I can be in live, and here my stage button is still blinking, same thing. So we're in live, I have information in the staging buffer, but I don't see it anywhere right now. And now I'm going to hit stage, and now I can see what that information is. So now the button is solid because we're actually looking at it, we're in staging mode. If I hit stage again to clear it, now the button is dark. There's nothing in the buffer. I'm still in live. Nothing has changed on my stage. Okay, so let's go into Q202. So now we've seen how to, so we just cleared the staging buffer in live. Works exactly the same as it did in blind. Stage. That information is gone. Let's look at how to commit information in live. So let's go ahead and go back into staging mode. So my light is now solid, my stage light, and we'll say 1 through 10. These are all of our downlight source 4s at 10 through full. Okay, that's kind of that's interesting. Maybe I don't want 1 or 10. Turn those off. Okay, what if I want the gradient to go the other way? So we'll say 9 through 2 at 10 through full. Again, none of this is happening on stage. We're just playing with it in the model at this point. Maybe I want to change my par color to Lee 200. Okay, great. Okay, so at this point, maybe I do want to commit some of this to my to the stage. So if we look at, so we can do this in sections, just like in blind. So if I say select last, copy to, enter, that has now put the change on the color source pars, which all we did was change the color. It has put it on stage, and they are now manual. So we haven't stored it in the queue because we haven't updated yet. We've simply moved it from the staging buffer into manual real output on our stage. Because we were selective, we still have our downlights to deal with. So if we look at 1 through 10, you'll see those are still orange. So they're not actually, they're still in the buffer. They're not on stage yet. So let's say yes, we want to commit these. So I'm going to say copy to. So in live, something else we can do that we can't do in blind is we can actually move these onto our stage in time. And then we do that with Sneak. So we can say copy to Sneak. It posts the word live on our command line there for us. If I don't enter a time, it will use our default Sneak time, or we can specify a time. Maybe I want a time of 5. And then when I press enter, those are going to actually sneak onto my stage in that time that I've specified. And now you can see that those are manual data in our live display. So I want to go ahead and clear my staging mode. We'll basically make sure it's empty, turn that off. And now I have manual data on stage, and I can do whatever I want with it, like I've always been able to with manual data. So I'm going to go ahead and just say update enter. I'm going to let those track, and now those are in my queues. So one more example here. Okay, so let's go back into staging mode, and I'm going to grab all of my linear fixtures, which are lining the edges of my stage. We'll grab those, and I'm going to put those at full, so it's 101 through 150. And I'm going to make those be yellow so they're easy to see. And I'm going to go ahead and deselect them just so it's a little easier to see the light and not the selection outline in our model here. So again, those are just in the buffer right now. So that stage light is solid. If I go to live, the stage light, the stage keycap is now blinking, indicating there's something in there, but it's not, we're not looking at it right now. I can go to blind, hit next to last, the staging key is still blinking. What I can do is I can take the information that's in that buffer and apply it anywhere I want. So I'm in blind Q203. If I enter staging mode now that information that was in the buffer is applied. From here, if I say last, we're still in staging mode. So I'm kind of looking at what is in the buffer on top of the data that's in those queues. And I can apply this anywhere I want. I can go back to live and say copy to enter. That would make it manual. Or what I'm going to do here is in Q201 in blind, I'm going to say copy to enter. I'm going to go back to live, and we're in 202 here. Nothing has changed on stage. But if I refresh this queue, if I go to queue enter, those linears are going to come on. And if I look at them in my live display, you'll see that they're magenta because they're tracking. Because in blind, I stored them in the first queue, and they simply tracked through. So this is a really versatile new mode that we can use to do things like work on something and then pause that work. Maybe we're cleaning something up in live or in blind, and our designer needs us to jump back and be with them in real time. So we can just leave it on the shelf in the staging buffer, work whatever we need to do, run through some queues for our stage manager, and then at some point we can go back to it, recall it, and continue that work. Okay, why don't we pause for questions? What do we got, Jason?
All right, we got a couple questions on the practicality of this and where it's used and where this is useful. I just wanted to build on what you just said. Maybe you're in a situation where you have a director or a lighting designer that you're working with that will get upset if they see the steps of building a queue. So you can build that queue in staging mode and then commit it to live, and they don't see all the building blocks to get it from point A to point B, and they can just see the final results. Another thing is in the live presentations, maybe you want to have a strobe and a color change and a movement change all happen on the downbeat of the music. That's something difficult to do now, but now when we have staging mode, we can drop all that stuff on as part of live sort of interaction. So I just want to kind of pull out a couple of other ways that this is kind of useful, because there was a bunch of questions in here about the usability of this and where you would use one or the other. All
yeah,
right.
I think those are great answers.
Cool. So we have a lot about the graphical representation of staging mode. It looks like it's just the command line where it pops up. Is there any thought to having more things, or is there more graphical interaction saying that we're in staging mode now as opposed to being in live or being in blind?
Yeah, did Lowell pop on?
No, he's not on.
Or Nick, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, I've got kind of so a couple of things, I guess, to tee up to that. So staging mode is weird in that it isn't quite a third mode. So it sits on top of live and on top of blind. So there is a live staging mode and a blind staging mode. So I think it's important to know, it's more important to know sort of whether you are in live and blind. That being said, and I think this has to do with some of the other comments coming in as well in general, this is very much our first pass of this tool, right? So we are seeing how people use it, and we're certainly open to changing, growing it. You know, I saw some questions come in that have to do with dealing, you know, storing stuff in reference data and things like that. I think we're going to get this out as a part of 3.0, see how people deploy it, both in busking, more live event punting situations, and in theater, and then kind of take it from there. So we didn't want to presume that we knew everything about how this feature was going to function. So I think that's an intentional tactic in this. This isn't complete, and we acknowledge that. So as you use it, as you get comfortable with it, again, the forums are a great place to let us know what we can be doing to improve that workflow. So we're not going to have all the answers right now, and I think that that's intentional.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I like to think of it as is we do have other parts of this desk that are very similar in the way they're kind of run up. You know, like we've got capture mode and we've got highlight mode, and those things are you're in a state and it just changes what the command line looks like. So I think that's kind of a lot of the thought process behind this, is because you're modifying your blind, you're modifying your live, you're not in an additional third state. So I think that's kind of where the concept of doing the command line change originally appeared.
And actually, it's a good reminder, Jason. I didn't want to spend too much time with examples, but highlight and remdim do work within staging mode. Just point that out.
Yeah. Question about submasters and how they work in staging mode, and if they work in staging mode.
I have not played with submasters for staging mode. I don't know if there's any special handling, but we could.
The actual physical faders would be as they always did and always be live, right? But I don't know about calling up stubs while you're in staging mode from the command line.
I mean, the staging mode, you could copy it because it's kind of floating above your existing data. So I would imagine you could copy that data to a sub, but let's see. I don't have any subs recorded. I don't know if that'll work, but. Yeah, that seemed to work. If I have subs up on stage, it's not necessarily like in the examples we looked at it in live, we were using queues, but remember it's putting it into manual data. It's not putting it directly in the queue, which it is doing that in blind. So any other, like I'm trying to think of an application for that with subs. Is this like if you're using subs with queues or subs by themselves? I'm curious. And again, this kind of falls into what Nick was saying.
Yeah,
we're really curious to see how you all start to adapt this feature.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but based upon the question, it seemed like it was somebody who builds a lot of their queues with subs as their building blocks is what I kind of got out of it. And please correct me if I'm wrong. Whoever asked that question, who asked that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a logic thing, right? Subs are what we consider playbacks, and playbacks are never blind, right? Like if you think about your go button, there's no blind for your go button. And so I'm going to use a word that if anybody ever says I used, I'll lie and say that I never used it. This is kind of as close to EOS gets as to a programmer, right? And I know that would cause fits with some of our coworkers. But it's a way for you to use the visualization window to kind of preview what you're going to be doing before you decide to commit to it, either by saving it into the database or by sending it to live. So I think that's where this intention comes from, right? Why don't, the intention is we have this new display, this new 3D display. Why don't we allow you to use it without affecting output or without affecting the database? So as Rob said, it really comes from, we've never given you an option to test things out in blind before you commit them. And the natural extension of that is to also be able to test things over top of live. So it isn't to say that we can't grow it beyond that point, but that is the function that it takes up right now. Subs being playback, I think right now they just don't fit into that world. And again, it's not to say that they can't, but there's a lot of logic to figure out. If you're in staging mode and you shove a fader up or you bring up a sub on the command line, what is the proper behavior? So there's stuff to be explored, I think, post 3.0. So that's my take.
And just to kind of button that up, just remember that information in staging mode only lives in that staging buffer until you send it somewhere else. And the defaults in blind is to send it to the queue you're in, and I guess you could edit subs in blind using that. I haven't played with that. And then in live, the default is to send it to manual live on stage values. But as we just found, we can force it to go other places. So it's not, it only lives in that staging buffer until you decide to do something else with it.
Okay. And that answers a question about asking about if you can record the staging mode to a different location. So that was one of the questions we just got in, but we just answered that. Is there a way to see what fixtures are in staging mode via Flexi or Query or some other method?
There is currently not, unless this came in recently that I didn't find it. But I know there's been a lot of discussion about that. I mentioned a couple things to Anne about it yesterday. So currently no, but that is certainly something we would look into down the road.
Is there a way to save things on a staging buffer, or is there only one staging buffer at a time?
Only one at a time. So it's one buffer total. It's not one for live and a separate one for blind. Like it is just one buffer. You could store things in like in a faraway queue, or you could make targets for those sort of ideas to come back to later. But as far as staging proper, there's only the one buffer.
All right. Just a reminder that staging to live can follow Sneak manual time and set up manual control times. That came in. And that's it for questions for this section.
Great. Okay. I want to look at just a couple quick things in the editor that we haven't hit on yet. This will just be a small section, and I will pause for questions, but I expect this to be brief, and then we'll spend the rest of the time looking at Scenic objects. So let's go to full screen here. And I'm going to go to queue out. And I'm going to open up our editor. Okay, back in the good old editor here. A couple little housekeeping things. I want to turn my grid off and my snap on and set my snap to 6 inches. Okay. Again, if you're following along through all the sessions, those things are probably done already. Just quick reminder, so this is our hierarchy over here. It defaults to be in the top right. We looked previously at how we can move these around and modify them. And then our inspector is the bottom right here. So we're going to spend most of this section on these two windows. So what I'm going to do is grab my center truss here and just look at a few more things we can do in our editor. And these will all be handy once we get to our Scenic objects as well. So right now, all of our trusses are just called truss square. So I want to grab this one and rename it. So I can just click on that, and I'm going to call that truss centerline, just to give it to me, so I can pick it out of the list. We can organize this list in a couple ways. So the second button, it defaults to unsorted, which is the order that I have it in here. So I can actually drag things around, and it will remember the order here. If I click on it once, it will sort A to Z. So all of my FBE points are back together here. Again, is Z to A. And then if I click it a third time, it's back to that unsorted, which is kind of a custom, whatever order I want to arrange these things in. There's several tools in here that we'll get to in a second. It's really just for your own organization and being able to work in here quickly if you're doing a lot of work in this section. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to associate some objects with this center truss. So I'm going to grab these fixtures, which I know they're 1 through 10. So I'm going to, instead of trying to select them in the model, I'm going to select them in the hierarchy, and you can do either one. So if I select it one at a time, I'm just left clicking with my mouse. It's going to only select that item. If I hold down Control and select, just like any or many computer programs, I can pick and choose. And then if I hold down Shift and select, it will do a range. So today I want to do that range, and then I want to click and drag these up and associate them with that truss. So I'm going to put on, got my truss center line, I'm going to put it on top and let go. And so now I have a little folder here, and I can expand that, and I can see that I have these 10 channels basically nested within that truss. So what this lets me do is if I select the whole truss, I can now move the fixtures with the truss. They're basically attached to it. If you look in the inspector, this is where our position and our world are going to come into play. We touched on this very briefly previously. So here they are the same. So position and world numbers are mimicking each other. When they differ, so if I just select a fixture that is on this truss, if I move this fixture, you'll see its position currently is -1 foot. I'm going to remember that so I can put it back there in a moment. But that is its position relative to the object it is associated with. World is its position in the model. And the reason its X is 22 feet is that's from the origin point of its parent object, and that origin point is on one end. I believe it's this end, our left here. So that's why that is there. So if I lower this, maybe it's on a tail down pipe or something, I can put it down 5.5 feet. And now when I move, if I reselect the truss, it's going to maintain, that one fixture is going to maintain its different offset from the truss there. So I'll go ahead and reset back at -1. And I'm going to put our truss back at 20 feet. So that's an easy way to move a bunch of fixtures at once if they're on a lighting position. We can also do this with objects. Last time we looked at the importing objects, and we had that platform with some stuff on top of it. So we could nest, the keyboard and the person to the platform, and then we could just move the platform, and everything would move with it. So it works the same for any objects, not just fixtures. We can also make a group. So I'm going to click the little hamburger menu here, and I'm going to say Add Group, and it's going to put it down at the bottom. And I can name that group, we'll say Stage Left Movers. And then I'm going to, I don't know their numbers, so I'm going to use the model here. And again, I'm using Control, I'm holding it down Control to select those. So it's those 7 fixtures, and I'm going to drag those into that group. And now when I select the group, even though it's not associated with a physical object in the model, I can still move those all together. And then I also have the ability to, I could put that group, I could associate that group with a truss or with a separate object as well, if I wanted to. So that is that truss. So I could drag this group and put it in there. And now that truss is associated with those fixtures. And if I expand this, the first level down is the group, and then the next level down is the channels. So a couple other really handy things that we haven't looked at yet, tools in the inspector. The lock button is incredibly handy. So I constantly am grabbing the floor when I'm trying to select something else, because it's the biggest object here. So if I lock it, what that does is it prevents me from making any changes. You see my inspector is grayed out here. I can still move or scale things in the model, so be aware of that. But once I deselect it, I can no longer select it in the model. I can still select it in the hierarchy if I need to. So we're not locking it out completely, but it helps you prevent misclicks. So like my stage, I'm going to go ahead and lock that as well. You'll see I get a little lock icon on top of my icon showing me that it is locked. Again, now I can't, if I'm trying to select this person and I misclick, it's not going to grab the floor, it's just not going to do anything. So I find that to be very handy for things that we know aren't going to move in our rig. Here, we'll do the person. The next one is the little eyeball here. So this allows us to make objects invisible. So they are still in the space. I just can't click anywhere to select it. In the hierarchy, there's a little eye on that icon showing you that it's invisible. So I can reselect it and turn visibility back on if you need to just hide things temporarily. Okay, so I want to add a couple of things here that we're going to use with our scenic objects. So I want to add a curtain, and so I'm going to come over to our library, and I think we may have briefly looked at the search box last time, but much like in Patch, I have found once I start using the search box, I kind of never go back. So I know those curtains, if I'm just kind of browsing to see like, oh, what furniture options do I have, then I may go through the folder structure. But if I know I'm looking for a curtain, I find it much quicker to just type in curtain. I'm going to grab this gray one here and drop that in. And it starts out as the world's tiniest little curtain for mice. We're going to scale that to be a little bigger and a little taller. And basically I want to fill this proscenium. Switch to move. That'll work. And let's back that up. So it's just behind. Yeah, that looks good. And we'll come back to that in a moment. And then the other object I want to add is a chair. So you can see all of our chair options here. We're just going to do a desk chair. And just a reminder about a couple inspector items here. Float it so we can see this a little better. Get it away from our person. So we do have our rotate buttons. We looked at these last time. So these are our 90-degree quick rotate options. So we have X, Y, and Z choices there. And then we have our move object to ground plane, which, as a reminder, the ground plane is the floor. It's not our scenery. So we do have to adjust that up. So it's actually sitting on top of our stage here. And then the last one here is this color chip. So this does not change the color of the object. It changes the color of the icon with the object here. So I can open that up. I've got some basic colors. You can store custom colors that you like to use. So make that kind of a neon green. And again, this is more for organizing yourself, much like reorganizing the order of these items. It's not reflected, all of these color changes and reordering doesn't affect anything else in the console. It's just here in the editor. So this is another place where it might be worth it to you to spend some time organizing and color coding, and it may not be worth your time. So it's one of those things for you'll figure out your workflow and what you need to quickly modify and move around your model. And then so maybe just as a quick example, all your objects from scene 1 are a color, and all your objects from scene 2 are a different color, and they're all near each other in the model. Those are the kind of things you could do with these tools. And then the last thing I want to look at in here are tags. So I'm just going to select a fixture here. So down at the bottom, we have this tag section. And this one has a couple already. So it's tagged with movers and with luminaire LED yoke spot. So those were brought in from Patch. Those are in our database fields in Patch. So they're automatically populated here in our model. And these are useful when it comes to searching. So we can also add our own. So I'm going to just grab our end fixtures here. There we go. We'll select all those fixtures. And I want to add a tag down here at the bottom. And I'm going to call those end units. And so now those fixtures have that tag associated with them. If I deselect everything, up in my search box, I can search for a number. So if I type 1, anything that has the number 1 in it. If I type 10, I've got all my 10s and channel 10. Channel 10 happens to be associated with that truss, so we're going to see that as well. I can type in a word, so I can type in truss. It'll bring up all of my trusses. And this is going to auto, or the items will be narrowed down as I type, just like it does in the Patch search. So if I type in end units, there's that tag I added. So this is all of those fixtures. If I type in FPE, it'll bring up those FPE points. So the tags can be useful if you have a lot of items that you're sorting through, and it can just let you narrow down what you're looking for a little bit more quickly. If we want to remove a tag, so type end again, all we have to do is click the X on it. And so as soon as I get rid of the tag on that fixture, you'll notice it disappeared from our list because it no longer has that search term in it. Okay, so that was all I had in here. Any questions on the editor? I know this is a little quick section. We are going to use the curtain and the chair once we get into movable scenic objects. So that was the main reason for doing this. But any questions, Jason?
Yeah, so has adding a tag changed? Previously with fixtures, any tag added here isn't preserved, and you have to set them in Patch.
Correct. It's kind of a one-way system at this point. So anything we add in the patch database will come into here, but not vice versa. So if you're doing a lot of fixtures and you want to have that organization, if you're bringing them in from Lightwrite, patch is still the main place to do that. Again, it's going to be workflow specific, but I would say off the top of my head, in here, tags are going to be more for objects than for fixtures. I can, like we did, add tags to fixtures, but more than likely, if I want that data elsewhere, then I would do that in patch.
Can tags relate to groups in the console?
I don't think so at this time. That's an interesting thought. Again, forums for that. Groups in the console are not shown here. So the groups that we, like the one we added here, is it's a separate thing. It's not part of our group list.
Yeah. What is the advantage of using a group over an association and vice versa? That just
Yeah. So an association requires a physical object. A group is just a way to keep yourself organized in the hierarchy. Although it is, and I wanted to ask Lowell about this. I'll show you guys since we're all friends here. Where's our group we made? It does put a little. We put it in a trust, didn't we? If I select it, if I zoom in, it does put that label in the model. It's not. I can't select it. I can't really do anything with it. So I just want to ask Lowell what the thinking behind that is. So other than that, it doesn't add anything into the model if you make a group. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I was just gonna. That label is literally there just to show you what group is there, right? So you can see the container label. You'll notice when you close the editor out, all those go away. So it's just for edit mode.
Oh, got it.
So you can kind of see what you're doing.
Do you need an external keyboard to control click on a console, or does one of the console's keys work?
You need an external keyboard. I don't believe, the face panel doesn't have a control key. The shift key, I believe, does not work in the editor, as like shift does on the external keyboard. So you will need a keyboard and mouse for this. And then a reminder, if you're doing tethered mode, which we talked about a million years ago in this series, you'll have to use the keyboard and mouse on the tethered device, not the one on the console.
Excellent. I think that's it for this section.
Okay, great.
Rob, I just wanted to clarify real quick before we move on, just because I don't think it got said explicitly. We use the database fields in patch to populate tags. So if you look at text 1 through 10, those are where that information lives, right? So if you're trying to create a tag in patch for a fixture, use your text 1 through 10 to kind of touch on what Anne said. You can put anything you want in there. So if you wanted to put a group label in there, you could. That wouldn't be dynamic, but it could certainly show up there. And don't forget that that field, those text fields are easily populated with something like a Lightwrite import. So whatever information you decide to hook up with something like a Lightwrite database, that's an easy way to import that stuff to use for search later. So just wanted to make sure that that connection was clear.
And then I'll also add, removing a tag from the augmented editor does not remove it from patch. So again, it's one way. It takes it from patch. We can't affect patch from the tags here.
Yeah, and I'll say just kind of again, I think that, that sort of stuff, 3.0 is nearing wrapping up. That's the kind of stuff that we'll look at in future versions, right? Of tying that in more nice. We don't think it's perfect, right? So know that that's the kind of stuff that will improve as we have more time to build the software.
I'll go ahead and hit done and accept those changes. Okay, so I'm going to go into patch here. So we're going to move into movable scenic objects. All right, so I'm going to patch these first of all. So basically what we're doing is assigning a channel to an object, and then we can do anything with that object or with that channel that we can do with a channel that we can do with any channel. And we'll take a look at some examples. So I want 501. There are two different types, there's movable and non-movable. So again, like I was just saying, I'm a sucker for the search bar. So if you wanted to search by manufacturer, they are under etc Fixtures and then Scenic element. But I just search for Scenic, and the only two things right now. So I'm going to make 501 be Scenic element, and I'm going to make 502 and 503 be the movable object. And I don't have to give it an address, of course. So I'm going to come back into live here and go back into my editor. So we have 501 as a non-movable, and then 502 and 503 are movable, and those have shown up in our hierarchy here. So these are basically we call it a node. And a node can be a lot of different things, FPE points and other things that we'll talk about probably next time. But right now it's just kind of a little block, like it's not really anything. But it is designed to be associated with another object. So this one I'm going to relabel just to demonstrate that. So I'm going to call this main drape. And then what I want to do is grab my my curtain, and I'm going to drag that on top of that channel. There we go. And you can see that it is folded underneath, just like our channels on the truss were. So where did our curtain move to? So I want my curtain position, help us find it, to be 0, 0, 0. That's going to associate it to the node. And Nick, where's my curtain gone? What have I done?
Because the channel isn't on?
It should default to on, but let's check that. Let's say done. I guess so. Okay. So here, let's just look at live. So I think it's because it's new. Yeah. So the home value of a Scenic channel is full. This seems like it's just a little glitch to me that it didn't start that way, but now we're back. So double check that your live value is correct. Okay. So I've associated that curtain with the with our channel 501, and now I can move. Actually, I want to move the actual node. So you can see that little box down here. So that's the node, and you can see that the curtain is offset from there. So I can move the curtain, or I can move the node. Right now, I'm moving the actual node. For non-movable, I don't think it makes too much difference which you do. For movable, it does, and we will look at that when we get to the movable ones. But right now, I want to have that curtain right about there. Okay. So next, I want to take my truss with the movers. So I locked it. I was being smart and I locked it. There we go. So I'm going to grab this truss and I'm going to associate it with 502, which is a movable object. And again, we have our little glitch here. I'll fix these all at the same time. And then the last thing I want to do is attach or associate my chair with 503. And then just to show these in the hierarchy, how those are all stacked under our channels there. Okay, so if I hit done here and accept, and just to see our stuff, I'm going to take, let's see, yeah, 502 and 503 are off, but I believe, so if I turn those on and then I sneak them, now their home value is full, so that's a little buggy, but that was the issue. Okay, so now we can see everything again. So I'm going to go ahead and go into queue 201, and I'm going to grab bookmark 3, so we're all kind of in the same place. And let's do a split screen so we can see our live table here. We'll move our PSD over so it doesn't grab focus. Okay. So you can see that, we'll get to where we can see everything. So 501 is at full, so I can manipulate this like I can any channel. If I turn it off, our curtain goes away, so curtain's out, curtain's back in, and I want to focus on that a little better here. Draw attention to that the light is behaving exactly as you would expect it. When the curtain's there, it's hitting the curtain. When the curtain's not there, it's not hitting the curtain, it's hitting the floor. So we can use these objects to help us approximate what lights will be doing, if they're hitting something they shouldn't be, if things are in the way, if the door is closed, the light can't go through it, sort of things like that. So we'll say in this queue, I want this curtain not to be here. So I'm going to go ahead and take it out. You'll see that it's a red manual value, just like we may expect. I do want to point out in ML controls or on encoder display under intensity, there's only two states here. It's on and off. And it is on at 1%. So if I type in 501 at 01, it's going to be on. At 00, it's going to be off. So we can't fade. There's no opacity or anything like that here. Okay, so I want to update this queue only. So I'm going to do that in our first queue here. And let's get our view back to where we can see everything. So if I press go now, we're going to go into our next queue, and that curtain's going to come back because that channel defaults to full, and I didn't track that off value. All right, so 502 is our truss. So this one is a movable object. So we have more parameters here. So I can still turn it off, just like I can with the non-movable. And I'll point out those pars that are hanging out there, we never associated those with the truss, so that's why those are staying there. For today, it's going to be fine. Just pointing out that that's why that's the case. So the other thing we can do is we can now move this object with similar controls to a moving light. So let's go ahead and go back to our snapshot one here and get our moving light controls back. So I can get to where you can see the truss. So I have XYZ focus, so I can move the truss on the x-axis very quickly. I can move it on the y-axis. And then probably what you would actually do with the truss is move it with the z-axis to go up and down. I also have orientation, so I can rotate this. And remember, the base point for this truss is on the, what it appears to be, sorry, this is going to rotate around the node. So that node is currently at the model origin, so that the truss is going to rotate around the model origin. So we'll home that. I can do that for Y or Z. And then just for fun, we can also do rotation speed. So I can set a speed, and then we can have our truss to circles like some sort of carnival ride here. That will be more useful with non-truss objects. We'll look at that shortly. So I'm going to home all of these for the moment, and then I want to bring down my truss down to the deck a little bit here. That looks good. So that's so maybe for this part of our show, that truss flies in. And I'm going to, I'm also going to give this channel discrete timing. So it is just a channel, so it's 5:02. I can say time 15, enter. I have my little discrete T, my little red T, just like I can with any channel. And I'm going to say update, enter. Okay, so now in our second queue here in 2:02, the truss is lowered in a time of 15. And I'm going to back up a queue. We'll see the truss fly back up. And now from here, I want to grab these 4 movers, and I'm going to put them on. Those are all over the place. I'll put them on our person here, and just zoom those out a little. And we'll put those at Roscoe 16. Give it a little color. And I do want to enable my XYZ format here. So I'm going to open my encoder display and hit that button. There we go. For all 4 of those movers. And we'll see why in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to update this queue and I'm going to let it track. And let's go to full screen so we can actually see what's happening here. Okay, so we're in the first queue. When I press go, the queue has a time of 5, but our truss is moving in a time of 15, discrete timing. Okay, but what you'll notice is that the 2 fixtures that are on the truss, because we stored those in XYZ, are continuing to point at our person on stage. So we're utilizing our XYZ while moving a channel associated with the truss. So I'll pause here for a second and say, this is really cool stuff. Looks really great. Getting this to sync up with your real space is going to be much harder than what I made it look like right here. If you're doing something like this, you would need, your positions have to be really accurate. Your timing has to be really accurate. So this isn't necessarily a tool to make all that happen. You're gonna have to do that with your reading controller and your actors, if you're following an actor on stage or something like that, or a piece of moving scenery that's tracking out. So it is really easy to make this look good in the model. You'll have to make sure that you can make it look good in your actual stage, because that's what your audience is watching. Okay, so the last thing I want to do here is look at our, I want to run this one more time while we're looking at the live display as well, just to drive that point home. So channel, we're going to look at channel 30 and 32. Those are the 2 movers on the truss. So let's back up a queue. So if you look at 30 and 32, if you look at their XYZ focus, it's not going to change. I'm going to go ahead and press go. It's not going to change, but our pan and tilt values are changing. So this is more driving home the point about XYZ than it is for movable scenic objects. But I think this is a good example of seeing how this works in real time as opposed to just repatching something. Okay, so our last example is our chair. So again, we can turn it off if we want to. We can turn it back on. I can move that chair. I'm going to move it upstage of our curtain. And yes, it went through the curtain. And I'm going to update, enter. So I'm just updating that position of the chair. I'm going to press go into 203. And that chair tracks, so it's still back there behind the curtain. And then in this queue, I want to move it other way. I'm going to have it be right behind our person so they can sit down into it. And I can update that in this queue. And then if I back up a queue, let's go to full screen again here. And I hit go, we can watch that chair track out here in the timing of that queue. I didn't give the chair discrete timing this time, so it's going to follow the queue time. And then I did want to show that rotation thing we saw earlier, where it's rotating around the node. So the node for this chair here, let's put the chair home. Where's my home key? There we go. So if we rotate, here, we'll just rotate on Z here. So that chair is actually not on top of the node. You can see the node is right where my cursor is. So it's rotating around it. If we want the chair to rotate on itself, as if someone's spinning the chair, we would have to have the object. Let's open our editor. Basically, we have to have the position at 0. So if I change that position to 0 here, so in the editor, and if I'm doing this a lot, and actually I can raise my Z. Now we'll do that in the model too. I'm done. So if I have a lot of objects that I need to rotate, in the editor, they will all be stacked on top of each other, which is not ideal. But currently, this is how it needs to work. And I know, Nick, is there anything you wanted to, there we go. So now we can rotate it. Here, let me do one more thing, and then I'll let Nick talk. So now I can still move it, but I have to move it as a channel. I can't move it in the editor in order to have this functionality. Oops.
Yeah, I'll say this. This is a bee in my bonnet. The way that the code is written and the way that things are developed right now, in order to get real world XYZ information about an object that's in a Scenic object movable, you have to have that relationship, right? So the XYZ of the Scenic object movable will always live at 0, 0, 0 in edit mode. So that when you move it in reality, you get real world measurements off of 0, 0, 0. I don't think we think this is ideal, but this is how it's going to be for 3.0. And then I think there will be lively discussions, which I don't want to overcommit without Lowell being here. But we understand that this is a second step, right? Like, this is something where in edit, you need to put any objects that you expect to be modified by a Scenic object movable, and you need to offset them relative to that 0, 0, 0 space, knowing that when you go into live, you need to set them to wherever they will be in your actual space. This is a great use for home presets, right? So if you don't like the centralized location of these things, using a home preset to put XYZ positions in where that chair actually lives most of the time in space is going to be extra useful. So consider other options to kind of work around this, but it is the way that it's going to be for 3.0. The other thing that's going to be a bit of a pain is when you go into edit. Rob and I were joking that it's like cats. You're just going to have a pile of furniture center stage. So consider putting those things in a group so that you can easily turn them on and off with the visibility states within Augmented. That'll help you work a little bit better. It's not ideal. It is the way it's going to ship. So just be aware of that. And we'll see what future versions bring us. But know that there's a little bit of a do-si-do, a two-step process to get things kind of where you want them right now. So.
Yeah, thanks. And then the only other thing I was going to point out here, we saw this with the curtain as well, is just the way light hits things. So I can see the shadow of the chair. If I turn the chair off, it's not there. So things will interact, lights will interact with the visible scenery that's there. So think about that as you're laying out your models and your objects and what you do and don't want to be visible at different times. But it's really easy, once you've associated objects with channels, it's really easy to program those in. And then once they're programmed in, they're there every time. You don't have to think about it too much. It's an easy way to manipulate that information. So that is, I know we're at time, so let's do some questions, but nobody's going off to hog today, so we can keep y'all as long as we want. What do we got, Jason?
All right, I just want to point out there was a bunch of questions at the beginning we kind of held off on about the moving truss, and there was some comments about being in an opera rep where they want to have the fixtures they want to have the pipes at different heights for different shows, but the fixtures aren't really moving, and so that's another reason to kind of use this sort of feature. So just wanted to acknowledge that those questions were asked, and hopefully we answered those in that previous section. Andrea asks, can I change a pan tilt show to an XYZ show easily, and what issues might occur?
You can change it easily. If by QStack or by palettes, you can select the whole range, select your channels, and then hit that XYZ enable button, and then you're done. As far as what issues may occur, this kind of alludes or reminds me of what I was saying about if you're in a theater where you do the show and then you take it out, nothing should change. So pressing that button doesn't change any of your data. Like if they're stored as pan tilt and you enable XYZ, yes, it is now. If you do nothing else, nothing will change as far as playback. Where you might get into trouble is if you're not sure which space you're in, if you're in pan tilt or XYZ, and you're making changes to the position in patch or in the augmented editor, then that could affect how things play back. So it is easy to change, but again, as long as you change nothing else, it won't be affected, but there's not necessarily a benefit to that either. Anything to add, Nick?
I think the number one benefit, even in a non-changing rig, is obviously doing sort of straight line calculations. If that's something we hadn't offered before, so I can see that if that's something you're going to be utilizing. I think what is important in this process is that you have to get your actual pose information for the fixtures in the space proper into Augmented. So the first step needs to be to get really accurate measurements of the XYZ locations of each space in your fixture relative to a fixed point, presumably your origin, and to get that into the model, right? Because the first step is making sure that the model most accurately represents the real space. Once that stuff is linked up, as Rob said, flipping that switch over to XYZ space, there shouldn't be any issues with that. But you can have some really, really unsavory results if that model is off, and now you start using things like point to click or using XYZ space. The model's not going to necessarily represent the space, and now you're storing in absolute data, an XYZ point in space, as opposed to using pan tilt data, which was tied to how that fixture got to that position previously. So I think my first step would be to save the show file in its current state, then maybe bring in all the XYZ information, and then maybe test a couple of fixtures through cues and other playback things you have. But again, as long as everything lines up reality to model, it's only math, he said. So I would probably try and take as much time as I could to go step by step, save each step of the process. So if something went off the rails, I was able to go back pretty easily. So.
And then I'll just add, you sort of alluded to this, but I was thinking of positions. So the end positions aren't going to change, but as we saw at the beginning, how we go from queue to queue or pallet to pallet if those are stored in queues could be played back differently if it's in a straight line or in a sweeping pan motion. So those transitions could certainly be affected. So yes, test before it matters.
Excellent. I got a bunch of questions about movable scenic objects. A lot of people are asking questions about feedback. So if you have a device that can send something to EOS, will it be able to register where it is located? So motorized truss or something like that.
Do you want me to take that one, Rob?
Sure.
Yeah, not in 3.0. So that's something that is sort of the next iteration of what we're looking at in this, right? Is how can we take things like the new ANSI positioning standards? How can we take things like Posi StageNet? You know, we make rigging solutions, so obviously integrating those products into this are of interest to us. So initial release, no. It's absolutely something that's being talked about. We really wanted to get this out and working first before introducing other systems. So that'll be the case. I saw another question that came in that I think kind of pertains to this that I just want to cover, which is, can movable scenic object channels output DMX in order to control things like stage lift or like that. First, we don't allow you to patch DMX to a movable scenic channel. So if you go into patch and you try and add an address to it, it will give an error, right? It's only for use in the augmented environment. Secondly, we don't control automation from the lighting desk, right? That's a bad idea. There's no e-stops. There's no emergency protocols. There's nothing to do with life safety, which is what a lot of automation requires. So if you have things that are DMX controlled that are automating, take life safety into consideration and be really cautious. I've had programmer friends that have walked into sets, seen the way things were going and weren't comfortable programming automated scenery or automated hoists via DMX through the console because there's no safety measures and have walked off the job. So I just wanted to bring that up as we are interested in integrating more with automated systems. We're very uninterested in actually controlling those automated systems. The types of things that we talk about for future development, if the lighting system were to ever integrate in that way, is to give lighting statistical information like I'm in this queue or things like that. But the operation of those systems always needs to be within the safe confines of that automation system. So that's my little soapbox on that. But it's a good question and something we get asked to do by producers and creators. You know, my question is always, you know, will it hurt someone, and can I live with that? So be extra cautious when you start talking about automation controlled with a lighting system.
Have we? I know at one point we were talking about OSC. Is the OSC tied into Augmented at this stage?
Yeah, I believe that you can do channel level control for that stuff. The XYZ parameters for those channels should be accessible through OSC. Maybe somebody, I have a couple of friends that I see in here that might know for sure. I haven't personally tested it, but I see no reason why you wouldn't be able to send information in via OSC to control that stuff. Scott's saying, yeah, it works. So giddy up.
Excellent. So similarly related to this is there's a question about if we can put the Z coordinate onto a submaster so we can manually track the truss coming in visually off a sub.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, channel data is going to work the same way anything else does. Now, you may have to figure out if it's a sub, it's going to be coming from a background state, so that, you know, you take that into consideration. If the background state is it's standard trim or, those sort of things. But again, just moving that sub, making the truss move at the perfect speed on your visualizer is going to have absolutely no bearing on what it's doing in real life. So just as a general reminder about that. But yes, I mean, I would kind of equate that to controlling color on a sub, which is a whole other soapbox we could get on. So it's because a sub is one directional. It's going from off to its recorded state. It's not going from state A to state B. So I don't know if that's necessarily the ideal way to do it, much like how I feel about color on a sub. But yes, it would work in the same way as any other parameter on a sub.
Yeah, and I think for, you also got to consider, if you're doing this, what your motors are going to be doing. In Augmented, we can slam that sub up and down all day long, and the motors don't wear out. The fixture doesn't slam into anything. There's no weight shifting with quick movements of the fixture. Just be cautious that, if the truss moves up and Augmented thinks that the fixture needs to move to maintain its XYZ focus position, it's going to do that as quickly as it can do that. And it's going to send real BMX to that light, regardless of where the fixture is located. So again, right now, there's no safety measures because Augmented and EOS don't understand what the real world is. So if you're doing things like classroom projects or, playing with visualization or doing projects at home, go to town with this stuff. I think sub handles are a really fun way to play with that. Be really careful when you're out in the real world with that kind of stuff because as Rob has said, we don't know what that is, and you could have some detrimental things happen to your equipment. So just be careful.
Excellent. Why are the Scenic objects defaulting to full? And is there a way to copy the profile to create a version that will default at 0?
I have not looked at editing that profile. The way I would do that is to put it in the home preset, which is how I tend to work on those sort of problems anyway. But it may be possible to edit that profile. But a home preset will certainly take care of that for you.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know if this is a beta thing or a the way it is thing. I think that weirdness occurs when you start messing with those, because I tried very early on to do some fun tweaky bits. So I would say that probably right now, no, but Rob's absolutely right. Use your home preset. I saw that question come in too. That was a very intentional choice. We wanted to make sure that if you had an object and you put it under a moving scenic object, that it wasn't disappeared by default. We wanted you to be able to see it. So that is intentional. Use your home presets.
Yeah, you definitely wouldn't want it to just vanish while you're presenting a webinar in front of a couple hundred people. That would be terrible.
Embarrassing. How can you imagine that?
Couple questions about revolves and turntables. Can you stack a node on a node and offset things and use the node as a center for a turntable, have everything move it around it?
Yes, absolutely. So it's going to, again, that turntable center will have to be, in the editor, will have to be at 0, 0, 0. But then the objects, if you associate the objects, the scenery, onto the turntable, much like we associated the fixtures to the truss here, then they're going to rotate right along with it. And the turntable, just to drive home, like the chair rotating that we were looking at earlier, in the editor, it will have to be, the turntable will have to be at center, but then we can move that channel in our queues or in live to be anywhere on the stage.
I am being told that the home preset does not work with intensity currently.
Yeah, I'm writing that down. I'm going to bring that up in development because that's a bummer. Yeah, we'll look into that and see what we can do. So I'll follow up with that. Thank you, everybody.
Question about partitions. So if a scenic element is outside of a partition for the console, can you still see that as you would if it was not in your if it was in your partition?
Is there any, Nick, is there any special handling
No,
partitions, or is it just going to follow?
Yeah, there's special handling for this, so it follows the rules of partition, right? Like, if that channel is at full, whether it's inside your partition or not, it will be visible in the model. Remember that channel levels are global, regardless of what partition or what user you're in. So that's going to be true of the model in a multi-console environment. The only thing that would be different is if, for whatever reason, somebody else had turned off that channel and you couldn't see it, or if your home preset worked, for example. That might be a thing worth looking at. So, one of the things to consider, don't forget, if you're in a partitioned environment, channels can live in multiple partitions. So it may be that you want multiple programmers to have access to all of the Scenic channels. But do remember that that's a global thing, right? So if I turn off the curtain because I'm trying to work on something, that curtain's going to be turned off for everybody else too if I'm out in live in a manual state, right? So this is where staging mode maybe would be a really, really good thing because staging mode, because it's on your command line, is a per user environment. So if you work in a multi-console environment, I encourage you to maybe spend a few minutes trying to familiarize yourself with how that might work if you're going to be using those tools.
What else we got, Jason?
Oh yeah, look at that. Can you nest scenic elements inside movable scenic elements?
Like non-movable inside movable?
Yes.
I don't see why not. Again, just the nesting is going to, because you can nest things in other things, so the order of the nesting is going to matter, and then the visibility state will be, the on-off will be just determined by the channel's value.
Yeah, it doesn't say, but I would assume like if somebody had like a cart that came on stage and sometimes there was a chair on it, sometimes there wasn't, they could shut off the chair but still have the cart come in and out. Mm-hmm. My assumption for that question.
Yeah, and keep in mind with that stuff that it all has to do with parent and children, right? The children are always inheriting whatever the parent is doing so far as visibility states and things like that. So the order in which you nest those things will likely have some impact on how that stuff works.
Right, like just in that example, if I turned off the cart, then I'm not going to be able to see anything. But if I just turned off the object on the cart will still be there. Like I can't have a floating object with an invisible cart.
Can we bring in 2D objects, for example, costume renderings with people to track around on stage?
Right now, we don't bring in images. So basically what you're looking for, what's called in 3D world, is a texture. Some form, if you can apply a texture to an object in a piece of drafting software, like Vectorworks, some file types like Collada will bring that texture with it. And if we can find that texture with the 3D model, we will apply it. So there are certainly ways to do that. Similarly with the objects-based color, right? If you have things, if you've built up, we're looking at that chair, for example. If you had built that up in Vectorworks and made the paddings on the top and bottom red and the rails on the side gray, we're going to bring that in. Not all file formats include that natively, so it'll be a little bit of touch and go. I think, and I don't want to commit again, because Lowell's not here, but I think I have heard rumblings around the hallway that in future developments, we're going to look at what texture support inside of Augmented means. But that is not something that we're spending a whole lot of time on for this build. So try building something in Vectorworks and bringing it in. I've had pretty good results with that. But Collada, the DAE file extension, I have found to be the most useful to come between Vectorworks and Augmented. So give it a shot.
Excellent. Is there a way to not have scenic elements included in active channels? So in the displays, is there a flexi mode or something that we can just get rid of all of the?
There's currently not a special flexi mode. I mean, query might help you some because technically they're unpatched.
Yeah, depending on how often you're going to be accessing them, this might actually be a way to use partitions, right? Where you could set those in a separate partition, because once partition is enabled, you have a flexi state that is partition, which will just show you your channels in partition, and then you can use all the other flexi states within that. It requires you to double hit on your command line to access those, and you can't record anything that's not in your partition. So I've not tried this in practice. Functionally, that's how I would think it would work, but I don't know how much of a pain it would be and would actually save you. Again, that's the sort of creature comfort that I think will come over time as we continue to develop this stuff. Yuli says select active, exclude scenic elements, which is good.
Can we build custom movable scenic objects? For example, if I have a truss that only comes up and down and only needs a Z parameter, is that a way to get around that CATS issue that we ran into with all the fixtures coming to the center, all the movable objects coming to center in edit?
I haven't played with that, Rob. I don't know how well that would work. I think you're going to need to, right now, the scenic element objects are going to need to be at center. And I have not had success with editing those profiles. I saw somebody else say that they did. You've got the software, play with it, see what it does. I don't think that that's anything that's intentionally there. So it may have varied results. So, but again, that might be something that we could introduce as a profile type later on that only does X, you know. That's a great for a feature request on the beta forum.
All right. One of the comments. Yep.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to give a tip. You know, don't forget that because these are just channels, palettes are useful. So maybe one of the ways that makes it fast for you is to have something like focus palettes that just change the Z height. You know, set it at this trim, set it at that trim.
One of the comments that just came in that's kind of related to this a little bit is that the comment is that the scenic movable objects does not have to be in 0, 0, 0. You can move it after the fact. It only comes in at 0, 0, 0. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead and move it and then sit there for 30 seconds because it'll snap itself back to 0, 0, 0. Yeah.
And I'll just, to go back a question, I've just been looking at this. So scenic objects are not included in select active. They are included in select manual, if they are manual.
Right. I think the original question was flexis, though, and I think they do show up in flexi active.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we've had a few comments over the course of this about ideas for additional flexi states. So please continue to put those in the forums.
Coloring objects, something that's on the list. I think that relates into the textures and everything we had just talked about. Changing the color of objects.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Lowell said, because this came up, I think, last time, I think Lowell said it is on the list. I think he said he was trying to get it in initial release, but it's obviously not there yet.
Yeah, what they were able to do was they put in a bunch of different colored objects. So you've got a blue cube, a black cube, a red cube. You know, like I think that's where we're going to be for 3.0. But again, the manipulation of stuff. We give you some basics. If you need to do beyond that, you can always use an external piece of software and bring it in.
Okay. I have a question from Benjamin. Is there any object that could act as a gauze layer?
Like a scrim?
A scrim or a...
I'm assuming
partially...
but are we talking about Benjamin, if you want to chime in again, are we talking about like a transparency layer or?
Thanks. I mean, all the curtains are solid, and there's not a way to change the opacity of an object.
Yeah, Benjamin said, right. Yeah, 50% transparent. You know, I know that you can bring in walls for Vectorworks, for example, that are, you know, one-way mirrors, right? That's an intentional thing that we do. I haven't tried bringing in anything that has a transparency set to it. So maybe I'll play around with it next week and see what we do. I think that would definitely be something, though, that you'd have to create outside of our world and bring it in. We don't have any sort of transparency settings currently. Take that however you want to take it.
Great. Sorry, I'm just kind of looking through, making sure we hit all the points here.
Yeah, I just want to mention, I saw that Lee re-commented on the 000. Yeah, you're exactly right in that it's still sitting there because that's its value in live, right? Whenever you go into edit, it's holding those values for you. So the thing there is that its real offset is at 8 feet because it's sitting in live. You can't permanently move that SEM in edit mode off of 000 and have it maintain that location and then offset objects underneath it from there is sort of the thing. So right now it's a two-step process. I think again, not to put words in our developers' mouths, but I think the ideal thing is that long term you'll be able to move that SEM point permanently in edit, build your offsets with things that are nested under there, and then not have to put it in that place in live. So I think that's right now we make you take that second step.
So I'm looking at that lot here now. So I'm moving the actual node, so I have channel 503 selected, as opposed to the chair object. And I'm going to wait a second, and it's going to jump back. And it's not going back to center, it's going back to where it is in live right now. But that offset it's all based on 000. And I could move the chair, so now I'm offsetting the chair from the node. So there's the node, and that will allow me to do it. But all those rotational things are going to be around the node, not around the center of the object. So that's the workaround in order to make things rotate correctly. If you're and that's why I said for non-movable, it doesn't really matter because you can stick it there as long as it looks right, you're fine. But for anything you're going to be moving or rotating, you'll need to kind of follow these rules for the time being.
Lou brings up he hasn't had any luck with the scrim objects he's tried and created and don't render in Augment3d. Again, we haven't tried that, but thank you for that comment.
Yeah, it may not be some. I don't know enough about how our graphics engine is set up to know if we're even able to do it right now. But it is often requested because we do use, you know, transparent and semi-transparent objects. So I'm sure that it is on a list somewhere for future development.
Is there an object for a cyclorama?
Not specifically, but we could do a wall or I have a white curtain, which is going to have texture. The curtains have fullness. We could also do, actually, I don't have a white wall. The walls are all gray. Do we have a white cube? Or we have some 2D objects or 2D shapes. I don't have a white one.
While you're doing this,
and the fullness of it.
I was going to say, is Lou was also asking about making a curtain flat. I think it's going to be the same process.
Yeah, it looks like we don't have any white objects. For today I was using the gray curtain, which I started with the black one, but the light didn't show up as well in the example. So that's why I used a gray one. And again, we're trying to I know that may sound like a cop out sometimes, but we're trying to get the visual representation is just that. We're trying to give you an idea of what's going on your stage. We're not trying to be photorealistic. So I'm sure we can look at adding these things in the future, but I know our last push to get the software out the door here is on the mission critical functions, and then a lot of this, the niceties, the creature comforts, as Nick said, will come along in the future.
I would suspect that a light gray walls that we have would render a lot of that stuff a lot better than a white surface in the visualizer. Even if the like in reality is white, I think it would render better on a gray surface. That's generally how a lot of these things work. I think we've answered all of the questions.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for sticking with us, everyone that's still there. I know we went a little bit over today, but we didn't have hog breathing down our neck, so there we go. We will be back with this series in 2 weeks. Next week, Nick has his top secret project we're all really excited about to chat about. Again, look for more information on that on Monday on social media and our website. And then 2 weeks from today, we'll be taking a look at FPE points and our focus wand in the app. So we're going to start taking all this, use the world we've built in here and actually bring it into our actual real space and tie those together really nicely. And then we'll also look at how Magic Sheets and Augmented can interact with each other or go back and forth with each other. Nick, Jason, thank you very much, as always.
Thank you.
For helping out. Any other closing parting shots?
Nope, just a lot of thank yous and a note that a finer mesh object might solve the gauze layer possibility. Haven't tried it, but it's worth looking into possibly.
Yeah, I think that would probably be a good thing to try and see how much of a hit it takes on your rendering.
Yeah.
The more
a lot of objects, a lot of polygons.
Indeed.
Excellent.
All right. See you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob.
Right. Thanks, guys.